Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Mark Brannon. I'm on the board of the Princeton Adult School, and welcome tonight. We're also looking very forward to tonight's lecture, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Richard Preston. Dr. Preston was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and attended Wellesley High School. And here I quote from his own unusually honest website. Quotes, "I graduated from Wellesley High School, where I had mediocre grades and a rotten disciplinary record, which included an assault on a teacher. Friends, I didn't hurt the man, but I pushed him, and that's morally and legally an assault." Close friends. "The incident resulted in my nearly being expelled from high school. I was rejected from every college I applied to." End of quotes. You know he can really write and get your attention when he says that. But he did pester the dean of admissions at Pomona College with weekly collect phone calls, and finally matriculated to Pomona, where he graduated summa cum laude. Dr. Preston then came to Princeton and received his PhD in English in 1983. He took John McPhee's writing course called The Literature of Fact, and he began writing very seriously from that point on. Dr. Preston is the best-selling author of 6 books, and here I brought my audiovisual aids myself. The first one, which many of you have probably read, is The Hot Zone. The second, The Cobra Event. And the third, The Demon in the Freezer. This is called his dark biology trio. The Hot Zone inspired the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo. Dr. Preston is a regular contributor to The New Yorker. And I brought in a copy of the article from about a year ago, the 80th anniversary issue of The New Yorker. And his article was Climbing the Redwoods. This is in the anniversary issue, and it's a great read. The same subject will be the topic of his soon-to-be-released new book, The Wild Trees. Dr. Preston has won numerous awards, including the American Institute of Physics Award and the National Magazine Award. He's the only non-physician ever to receive the Centers for Disease Control Champion of Prevention Award. Even an asteroid is named after him. It's named Preston in his honor. An asteroid, Preston, I understand, may one day collide with Mars or the Earth, causing an explosion similar to the one that killed off the dinosaurs. Hopefully we'll get through tonight without that happening. Well, tonight, Dr. Preston speaks to us on climbing the tallest trees, biology and forest canopy science in the California redwoods. And you can see that he's brought a lot of equipment which he's going to be showing to you down here. He promises to include discussion of the conservation of these fast disappearing canopies. He lives near Princeton with his wife Michelle and their 3 children, including a son who's attending tonight, Oliver. I understand they climb trees with him. So let's welcome Dr. Preston for speaking.
Is this thing working?
No. Let me work on that.
Okay.
Maybe
a little bit of warm-up needed?
It is working.
It's working now?
Yes.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that introduction. I might add that I'm also a grateful former patient of Dr. Mark Brannon, and our 2 daughters have attended Stewart School, where Sally Brannon is a well-beloved teacher there, and my daughter Laura had her when she was in 6th grade at Stewart and loved her. So I'm very pleased to be here, and it's great to be here with the Brannons. I have, for the past decade or so, been utterly fascinated with microscopic life forms, particularly the ones that kill people in gruesome ways. I was once editing a book with my editor, a woman named Sharon Delano, and she came to some particularly gruesome passage about an autopsy, and she said, "Richard, you are just a 14-year-old boy who likes to gross out the girls." And I couldn't very well deny it. But lately, I've become interested in redwoods. Now let me see if I can get the slideshow here to work. There we go. So I played around with viruses. That's Ebola virus. There you have The Demon in the Freezer, which was the last of my books about the redwoods. And when I had finished the book, I got a little tired of the kind of horrific and somewhat depressing aspects of dark biology. And I became interested in trees, in particular the coast redwood trees, which are, as far as we know, the largest individual living organisms in nature, as distinct from the smallest, which are the viruses. Let's see if that's going to work. There we go. The coast redwood tree, its scientific name is Sequoia sempervirens. It's a relic species of great antiquity. The species may be 20 million years old or much older than that. The genus may be considerably older than that. We don't know the origin of the redwood in time. Coast redwood is an absolutely magnificent and very beautiful form of life. This is a drawing of a redwood named Atlas, a member of the Atlas Grove, which is in a small park on the coast of Northern California. And the Atlas Grove is a secret grove. Its location is only known to about 25 people on Earth. Most of them are botanists. This tree is not marked anywhere in the park where it exists. The Atlas Grove was discovered in 1991 by a grocery clerk named Michael W. Taylor, who was a redwood fanatic and is an amateur researcher into redwoods. He told the botanists about it, and they began climbing in the trees, finding extraordinary things about these life forms and the habitat, the ecosystem in which they exist. A redwood is a conifer, and it's a member of the cypress family of trees. It has flat needles, and it has very small seed-bearing cones, which are about the size of olives. It lives in the range in this map. You can see the range of the coast redwood tree. It's made out in red. It lives in moist habitats, particularly in the bottoms of rainy valleys along the coast of California that are soaked in fog at night. It grows particularly large and magnificently tall on the north coast, up along here, particularly in pockets of true, deep, temperate rainforest, where the rainfall can exceed 100 inches a year, and it almost never snows. This, by the way, that's the San Francisco Bay. This is Santa Cruz. And the range of the redwoods continues all the way down, about halfway down Big Sur, and it ends right there abruptly on a little mountain called Mars Hill. The redwoods extend exactly 14 miles up the coast of Oregon, right there, where they stop. They can't stand freezing weather. It's the tallest living thing on Earth, and botanists believe that it's also the largest individual living organism, not only today, but which has ever existed in the history of life on Earth. The redwood is a different species of tree than the giant sequoia tree. The giant sequoia lives in the western Sierra Nevada mountains at altitude where it snows all winter. And this tree, this particular species, gets most of its moisture from snow during the wintertime, and it does not live in rainforest. This particular tree, the General Sherman, is now thought to be the largest individual living organism on Earth. But there were redwoods as recently, perhaps as the 1970s, that were larger than the General Sherman, that were cut down in logging operations up there on the north coast. But there are stumps which remain that indicate that the redwood was considerably larger than even the largest giant sequoias. Now you can see here is a map of California that shows you, we're looking obliquely at California from the west. That's the San Francisco Bay. This is the coastal fog belt along Northern California where the redwoods occur, coast redwoods. Up here at high altitude in the Sierras are the giant sequoia trees. Many people don't realize that there are different species. Quite a few people are familiar with the coast redwood tree from having been to the Muir Woods National Monument, which is in Marin County, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a very heavily visited spot, and it's one of the most beautiful forest habitats that I've ever seen. However, the trees that live in the Muir Woods are by no means the largest or tallest individuals of their kind, which live much deeper on the north coast, in areas where tourists don't get as often, and which are often buried in rain. When you go along the north coast, you often see this. You see weather coming off the Pacific Ocean and piling over the valleys inland. These trees are often wreathed in fog. It's a rainy, moist habitat. It's true rainforest. It's an environment which is absolutely dense with botany and plant life. Right here you can see these are called sword ferns. This is a tree called Artemis. Artemis is one of the largest life forms known on Earth. Its basal diameter right here is 16 feet. You can't tell the scale from this photograph. Artemis was discovered in 2002 by a young woman who was exploring the rainforest for giant trees. These trees had literally never been noticed before by botanists, scientists, or anyone. And it's very hard to get through this rainforest. It's very dense, very difficult to move through. When you look at it from the air, it looks like rainforest. But it's a rainforest composed of conifers, very tall trees, not at all like the rainforests of tropical South America. Yes?
Quickly, in that photograph, what river was that? Is that the Eel River? Or?
That photograph there? That was the Eel River, yeah. If you're familiar with Northern California. Oh, that's better. There we go. There we go, cool. These trees are absolutely huge. They die instantly. A redwood does not linger. If you walk around the forest in New Jersey, everywhere you go, if it's an old forest, such as the Institute Woods here, you'll notice dead trees, dead standing trees. Redwoods die instantly when they lose the battle, the war with gravity. They may live up to 2,000 or more years, but when they go in an instant. The root system gives way and the entire tree falls to the ground. The oldest redwoods are thought to be roughly the age of the Parthenon, roughly 2,500 years old. But no one knows the age of the oldest living redwoods because no one to date has been able to drill into any of them to count its annual growth rates. And in fact, it might be a useless exercise because the oldest redwoods are typically hollow and rotten at the core, and they no longer have growth rings that can be counted. So we can only guess. And it may very well be that some of the oldest members of their species, some of the botanists believe this could be 5,000 years old, which would mean that they are considerably older than the invention of the Hebrew alphabet. The two main figures in my book are two young botanists named Marie Antoine on the left, she is a Canadian, and Stephen C. Sillett, Steve Sillett on the right. They are the principal explorers of the redwood forest canopy. Forest canopy is defined by botanists as being the portion of a forest which exists about above the level of a person's eyes. So everything above what you can see when you're walking around on the forest floor is the canopy. And the deep redwood canopy is an unexplored region of nature. It's a lost world above California, which has barely been explored. And when Steve Sillett first began climbing in the coast redwoods in 1996, he was doing explorational botany and descriptive natural history. That's simply the science of looking to see what you see up there. And they identified many forms of life in the redwood canopy, some of which today still have not been named or identified by scientists. I'm going to go through a little exercise here to try to help you imagine the size of a coast redwood tree. These trees are absolutely enormous. And I wonder if we could have the lights up. I brought some rope with me. And I'm going to show you a little something. And I'm going to ask for the participation of the audience in this exercise. First of all, this is a tree climbing rope. It's a special rope which is only used for climbing in trees for no other purpose. It's a soft, strong rope which is very gentle on a tree. Now, at our place out in Hopewell, we have a big, magnificently big white ash tree named the White Witch. And its circumference The circumference of this tree at the breast height of a person, 4.5 feet off the ground, is 9 feet. It's a big tree. So I'm going to show you on the floor here about what the basal diameter of a 9-foot tree looks like. I made a mark right here on the rope. That's actually 9 feet, believe it or not. And if I form it into a circle, you can get something of an idea of what the base diameter of a pretty good sized tree in the Princeton area looks like. Can you all see that? I don't know. Can you see that? That's a pretty good sized tree. Now that tree is, the white witch is probably 80 feet tall, something like that. So it would easily protrude through the roof of this auditorium and well above it. Now, the largest coast redwood that we know of is the lost monarch. It lives in the Grove of Titans, which is an extremely secret grove of redwoods. The exact location of the Grove of Titans is probably not known to more than 12 people on Earth, all of whom are botanists. I've been to the Grove of Titans because its discoverer, Michael Taylor, the grocery clerk, took me there. And when you go to the Grove of Titans on the north coast, you follow a number of different trails. When the botanists go in there, they tend to vary their route into the rainforest so that they won't leave a visible trail on the ground that someone could find. Botanists guard the secrets of their rarest plants with the jealousy of a gold prospector who has found a rich pocket of ore. The lost monarch has a circumference near its base of 94 feet. So I'm going to pull out 94 feet of rope, and we're going to make a circle. If you can participate and help me out with this, I'm going to see what we can do. Give you a sense of what the base of this tree is like. So I'm going to hand the rope to some of you folks back here, if you don't mind. For those of you who remember your high school geometry, if the circumference of a tree is 94 feet, then its diameter is 94 divided by pi. So its diameter is a little bit less than 30 feet. So just start feeding that rope out. Let's see what happens here. We've got a ways to go yet. There we go. There we go. I think we're probably there. I'm going to try to take it down because I don't want to mess up your cameras there. How are we doing here? Here, Mark. Take a little rope. Eventually we're going to see that mark. I don't know where it is. Tell me when you guys see a blue piece of tape come out of the bag. Not there yet, huh? The lost monarch is a very impressive organism. It is much, much, much bigger than a blue whale. Also a lot older. How are we doing? There it is. Okay. This is the base of the lost monarch. Wow, that is fantastic. Look at that. Now, is that cool or what? That's way cool. Now, in terms of height, the tallest redwood, you're just going to have to imagine this. The tallest redwood is the Stratosphere Giant, which was discovered in the summer of 2000 not by Michael Taylor, but Chris K. Atkins, who is a salesman who, like Michael Taylor, is obsessed with redwoods and is an amateur scientist himself. Discovered in the summer of 2000. It's 37 stories tall, 370 feet tall, and 1 inch. Let me show you some images. You know what you guys could do is if you just sort of feed the rope along, eventually it will come down. Let's see if I can bring the lights down here. That's the lost monarch. How's that? That's the lost monarch.
The diameter was 39 feet?
You know, the basal diameter at the height of a person's chest above the ground is about 30 feet. Yeah. And the height of the Lost Monarch is only about 310, 315 feet, 31 stories. The oldest and the largest redwoods, they're the beasts, but they don't tend to be the tallest. The tallest redwood is the stratosphere giant. This is an image taken by the distinguished photographer James Ballock. And it's 370 feet, 1 inch tall. There's a climber in the tree, a speck. The tree is 18 feet across at the base. The stratosphere giant is believed to be 2,000 years old. It is presently growing taller at a rate of about 5 to 7 inches a year. In terms of its girth, it's adding only about 1 millimeter a year in girth. But because it's such a large organism, it's adding mass at a fantastic rate, even though it's putting down a layer of wood on its outer cambium of about 1 millimeter. The stratosphere giant also has another interesting characteristic, which it is leaning by 6 degrees. I don't know if you can see the lean. There's a little bit of a lean in that tree. When a redwood begins to lean, it is doomed. It means that redwood is losing the war against gravity and it will fall. The stratosphere giant is doomed to die. We don't know when. It could happen next week, or it might not happen for 200 or 300 years, but it's a goner. So how do you climb one of these organisms? Very carefully. I have to tell you that I only found out about the redwoods after I became a recreational tree climber. I had finished The Demon in the Freezer, and I was looking for something to do that had nothing to do with writing. And I found out about this tree climbing school in Atlanta, Georgia, called Tree Climbers International. I went down there, and I got some basic instruction on how to climb a tree. The climbing method is known as the arborist climbing technique. An arborist is a tree surgeon. Used to be called a tree surgeon, now they're called arborists. And they use these special ropes and extremely specialized knots, which are only used for climbing in trees, to get around in the branches of a tree. The arborist climbing technique is something that you may very well have seen if you've hired an arborist at any time to do work in your trees. This is my daughter Laura learning the arborist climbing technique from a climbing instructor. I took her down to the climbing school, and she became the youngest certified tree climber in the history of the sport, recreational tree climbing, at the age of 13. There she is up in a tree. You notice when you're climbing in trees using the arborist technique that you always have a rope above you, and you're suspended from the branches of the tree on strands of rope, rather like a spider hanging on a silk thread. This is Oliver, who's here tonight, looking cool. You can see some of those knots. He's about ready to ascend the White Witch, which is in the background there. And here he is up in a tree. Kids take naturally to tree climbing. They're better at it than adults. They pick the technique up right away. I tie all the knots and I do all the rope and rigging. Kids are not allowed to do that. But once you get them tied into a rope, they're perfectly safe, and they tend to like to scoot right up to the top of the tree. This is my wife, Michelle. She's afraid of heights. We've got her up in the tree a few times as well. This is Marguerite, our oldest daughter, looking cool. And you may notice something very different about climbing trees as distinct from rock climbing. A rock climber moves up a vertical surface of stone by clinging to the stone with his or her hands and feet. And if you know anything about rock climbing, there's a belay rope, and there's somebody below the climber with a slack, loose belay rope, so that if the climber falls, they can be caught in their fall by the belayer. But in tree climbing, the rope is used not as insurance, but as the principal tool for movement in a forest canopy. You're always suspended on rope. And a skilled tree climber can move through the branches of a tree without physically touching the branches with any part of their body, by simply flinging ropes over branches, getting the rope back to themselves, making a loop of rope, tying a knot, and then moving horizontally or at a diagonal through the air. And this is Laura doing it. She's moving from one tree to another through the air without being in contact with either tree, And those two ropes are attached to two different limbs of two different trees. That's known as skywalking. We've camped out in the forest canopy in the Princeton area. Laura is sleeping in a hammock, a special hammock called a tree boat. She's 65 feet off the ground. And we're at a place in the woods where you can't actually see the ground. When the trees are in leaf, they completely block the view of the ground. Laura is safe. She's wearing a climbing harness, and she's tied to the tree with that strand of rope right there, so that even if she were to roll out of the hammock, she would just end up hanging in space next to the hammock. This is not a place for people who are terrified of heights. However, it has its pleasures. And one of the things that we noticed was that when you wake up in the morning in one of these tree boats in the middle of the forest canopy, you hear migratory songbirds singing out of 3 dimensions all around you. And you also come in contact with animals that know nothing about people. The woods around here are filled with flying squirrels. The flying squirrels never come in contact with humans. And when you get up into a tree, they're not afraid. And Oliver can tell you that we were camping out one night and he had 4 flying squirrels crawling all over him, and one of them sat on his head. They were evidently exploring him for something to eat. On another occasion, I was up in a tree and there was a flying squirrel looking at me. And I reached out my finger and I began stroking it between the ears, and it closed its eyes. And then a little while later, it kind of came to its senses, and you could almost see the thing thinking, "What am I doing here?" It spread its soaring surfaces and just glided off into the canopy. It was a lovely experience. Well, at any rate, with a certain amount of training, I found out about these people who are climbing these gigantic redwood trees. And I decided that it would make a cool article for the New Yorker. So I called up Stephen Sillett, who really didn't know me. And I went out to visit him in Marie Antoine at their little house. This is in the town of Arcata in Humboldt County, California, where Steve Sillett is a professor of botany at Humboldt State University. And Marie Antoine is a lecturer in botany at the university. Their house is a climbing nexus in the Pacific Northwest. And you go there on just about any occasion, and there will be cars parked in the driveway. These are all climbers, tree climbers. They're the most studly looking people. They're all walking around, strutting around with all their incredibly fancy gear and their beautiful bodies, talking about climbing giant redwoods. It's a great scene. And then he's got a garage there where these are forest canopy scientists, and they've got some serious science going on there being funded by the National Science Foundation. So they've got a lot of equipment and a lot of climbing gear, which they stage inside their garage. Here they're working on some stuff. Now, when I identified myself to Steve Sillett, the first thing he said to me was, "Are you a recreational tree climber?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, you know, you can't come climbing the redwood canopy with me." He said, "These trees are gnarly, and there are some dangerous, tough climbs." And in addition to that, he indicated that he has many feelings of misgivings about recreational tree climbers. He's frightened, he's very scared that they're going to find out about the locations of some of the trees that I've just shown you and try to climb them. He wants the environment kept pristine for the science. So he refused to let me climb, and he was reluctant at first even to show me the trees. But one day, and furthermore, the climbing technique that they use in redwoods is different, quite a bit different than what I've just shown you. He wasn't going to tell me the technique either. One day, Steve and Marie went off to a party. I was staying at their house. And I went into the garage and I looked at their climbing equipment very carefully. And I don't use a tape recorder as a journalist. I use a notebook, a little one of these, just like this. And I'm feeling strange. I brought the notebook into the garage and I took detailed notes on the climbing equipment. And then I watched them climbing with it. And in the end, I came back to his place and I tied one of the principal tools of movement in the redwood forest canopy, which is a complex 60-foot long rope festooned with carabiners and little lengths of rope called a motion lanyard, also called a spider rope. And I tied one of these spider ropes in front of Steve Sillett and Marie Antoine, and he said, "Dude, where did you learn how to do this?" And I said, "In your garage." Having demonstrated that I knew it, I also practiced the technique in our trees here in Princeton. They agreed to take me on a number of climbing trips into the redwoods. Some of these trees are in tough locations. They're hard to get to. Here we are, we're crossing a river on a line, and I'm carrying about 50 pounds worth of climbing gear and ropes and scientific equipment here. I've got it hung on the line, and I'm pulling it along with my legs as I go. How do they get into these trees? Well, what they do is he fires an arrow here that is attached to a strong fishing line. And he can, with this is a Browning hunting bow, he can get this arrow up to 250 feet up over the branch of a redwood tree. Redwood trees typically don't have any branches that are sturdy and safe on their lower trunks. You may have to fire as high as 250 feet to get one strong branch. When you get the fishing line over the branch, then you take the fishing line and you use it to pull a long nylon cord all the way up over the branch and all the way down to the ground again. And then you use the cord to pull a super strong climbing rope up over the branch and down to the ground. And then you anchor one end of the rope on the ground. So the rope is in an upside down U over this branch, which may be 25 stories overhead. And then you climb up the dangling end of the rope using mechanical rope ascenders, the same kinds of ascenders that cavers and rock climbers use to get up cliffs and cave walls. This is the base of a giant redwood, John Muir, which has been burned in a forest fire probably 500 years ago. And when you get on the rope, you're wearing a special harness called a tree climbing saddle, which you can sit in, and you can sit in it more or less comfortably for up to 8 hours at a time. And these people, when they're on rope and aloft in the redwood canopy, they may not come down for hours, if not days. They sometimes sleep up there. And you wear a helmet, and you have a communication radio, because these trees are much too tall to communicate in by shouting. And then you go up. And the initial ascent is really hairy because you're in the middle, you're lofting yourself up into redwood space. And it's a huge gulf-like space below the canopy but far above the ground. And you look down on the forest floor, and what you see are these ferns and this rainforest, and then these enormous columns of trees. We are at one end of the Atlas Grove. This is a tree named Zeus. This is Rhea. You can't make it, most people can't make the ascent in one pull, and so you stop and rest once in a while. As you get higher up, the light begins to increase. It gets brighter because there's much more sunlight upper in the canopy, and so there's more life up there. But the lower canopy is a kind of a void of space, and as you look around, you don't see very much in terms of life on the forest floor. Redwoods soak up about 98% of the sunlight that falls on their crowns, leaving very little light for anything else on the forest floor. So anything that lives needs to live up in the canopy. As you go up into these trees, you begin to see more light, and you begin to see epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that grow on the branches or on the trunks of trees. That's a red huckleberry bush. In the fall, when the scientists are climbing in these trees, they love to stop and rest and pig out on huckleberries. And mosses are all over the tree, and the white stuff is a variety of about 10 different species of lichen. One of the dangers of ascent is that, particularly when you're climbing a tree that's never been climbed before, these trees have enormous amounts of dead wood hanging in their crowns. These pieces of wood are called widowmakers, and for a reason. The widowmakers in the redwoods can be the size of a Chevy Suburban. And a climbing rope can stir one of them loose, and a Suburban falling 30 stories down onto you is not going to leave a survivor. When a branch falls out of a redwood 30 stories, it can impale itself 5 feet into the ground, as it's done here. Some of the redwoods that are losing debris, or calving, as the scientists say, will leave these debris fields on the ground beneath them. This is a fresh debris field at the base of Rhea and Kronos. Kronos lost its top in a storm in September. and when the top calved out, it stripped off one whole side of the masses of structures on Rhea and left this on the forest floor. You don't want to be in the middle of that when you're climbing. When Steve Sillett climbs a tree, Marie Antoine is very, very fearful. And she watches him like a hawk, and she does not take her eyes off her husband when he's making an ascent. And she looks worried in this photograph, and she is worried. She has saved his life on at least one occasion when she spotted something big, teetering, and looking like it could fall on him. Steve is an intense, passionate tree climber. He's a superb athlete. I'm not that much of an athlete. I like to look around a little bit when I'm climbing. This is Idril, one of the tallest trees on Earth. The rope that you're climbing is anchored on something beefy on the ground. This rope is about the diameter of your pinky. And it's a special rope known as static assault line, tactical rope. It's got various terms. It's also called black rope or camo rope. And it's a type of rope that's super strong and ultra light and is favored by military special forces for vertical operations in darkness. The redwood climbers like it because it's very strong and reliable. And also, it doesn't show up. They like to go low profile when they're climbing. They don't like to, tourists or anybody to notice what they're doing. This is a photograph that I took in a redwood named Pipe Dream. Pipe Dream is the third tallest tree on Earth. And I'm about 120 feet off the ground. And this is to give you a sense of what it looks like and feels like climbing a redwood. These trees often have smaller trees coming out of their bases that are all parts of the same organism. These are known as ramets. Ramets are genetically identical. They have the same DNA as the main trunk. The ramets on Pipe Dream are dwarfed by Pipe Dream itself, and yet each of these ramets is, in its own right, would be a larger and taller tree than anything that grows east of the Mississippi River. On the ground, that tarp is it's a 12 by 10 foot tarp. And the climbing rope that I'm on is right there. You can see the anchored rope. It's running up, it's anchored here, and you can see this thin line. It's running up 300 feet into the tree to a pulley arrangement, and then it's coming down the tree and I'm hanging from it. It's a little bit of a disconcerting experience to see that rope over there and know that your life is hanging on it, and that if anything happened to that rope there, you could go to the ground. When you look up these trees, what you see is just this shaft, this dizzying shaft that goes up and out of sight, and you can't even see the forest canopy. These are the ramets of Pipe Dream. There's one there, there's another one there, and we're nowhere near the top of the tree. And there's Steve Sillett climbing above me on a second rope. These trees get bigger when you get up in them. This is a lubitar, one of the largest redwoods on the planet. They get more complicated. They get huge. The diameter of this trunk is bigger here than it is on the ground. Can you spot all the climbers in this tree? See that? That gives you a sense of the scale of the redwood forest canopy. This was truly an undiscovered world before Steve and Sillett began climbing in it. People had no idea what was up there. You can't see any of this from the ground. I've walked through the Atlas Grove where this tree lives, and you have no idea that that's up there when you look at that tree from the base. These trees do something which botanists call reiteration. They send out extra trunks. If a branch is damaged or something, the tree will send out a copy of itself vertically right out of the branch like that. And here's an example of reiteration. There's Steve Sillett leaning against a reiterated trunk. And it's coming out of this massive buttress, so-called buttress, which is a structure on the side of a redwood that's at least 500 to 1,000 years old. It's probably considerably older than Columbus's discovery of the New World. Here we have another trunk that came out and then got snapped off, probably by falling debris. And there's another trunk coming out. This is reiteration in the dead redwood top, and you can see it pretty clearly. The tree, as it moves upward into space toward the sun, is trying to dominate light and trying to dominate space around it. And as it does so, it makes copies of itself on smaller and smaller scales. This is why it's called reiteration. And the result is what a mathematician calls a fractal structure. This is the Mandelbrot set. It's the classic fractal, in which it repeats its shape over and over again on smaller scales. I think it was the physicist Eugene Wigner who said that, the fact that nature seems to know mathematics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. You can see a buttress here coming out of this redwood, and then this redwood is making a copy of itself right there. When you get up into this complex of material in the top of a giant redwood, you can feel lost. You really don't know where you are. Climbers have been known to get lost. Most of the forest is in the air. It shows you the surface area of the trunks. And you know, the surface area seems to peak out at about 65 meters above the ground, way above the ground. And you see fern gardens. Those are leatherleaf ferns, and there's a big widowmaker. And stuff is dead. These dead trunks are tremendous habitat for all kinds of things that live there. You get higher into the tops of these trees, and you find canopy lichens that don't exist on the ground. This is Usnea and Alectoria, two types of lichen. Finally, it tends to open up at the top, and it gets sunny and warm. This is Marie Antoine sitting at the top of a tree called Adventure, just enjoying the view. To give you a sense of how tall these trees are, this is a tree that is growing at ground level. This is ground level here. This tree is 30 stories tall, more than that, 32 stories I'm at right there when I took that photograph. You look around, you take notes. I'm hanging on a motion lanyard on a spider rope, which I'm going to show you later if we have time. The redwood canopy is dense on the top surface, and you can't see the ground. You see huckleberries. You see these beautiful lichens, pumpkin pie lichen. You see hypogymnia, which is a lichen you find everywhere in northern canopies. You find these leatherleaf ferns. They're beautiful, beautiful plants. And you can find veritable Japanese gardens. Steve and I are at 300 feet in Rhea. This is Rhea Gardens. And you wouldn't know it from the photograph, but Steve is spending his weight entirely on rope. And if he were to cut loose from that rope, he would fall all the way to the ground. His rear end is hanging out into nothing but air, nothing but space. And I'm standing on this branch with 1 foot. I'm doing something called branch walking because I don't want to break that branch. I'm keeping my weight. About 90% of my weight is suspended on my rope. And I'm just kind of twiddling along with 1 toe on that branch. And we're inspecting and looking at this garden without disturbing it in any way. There is soil up here called canopy soil. It accumulates over hundreds and hundreds of years, over centuries, in the tops of these trees. There's a little leatherleaf fern. There are huckleberry bushes, numerous species of lichens right here, and you sometimes find broadleaf plants. There's silal, a plant called silal. You wouldn't know if you were in the canopy, except that these don't occur on the forest floor. So if you had a sharp eye as a botanist, you would know that you're way up in space here. This is not the same kind of environment or ecosystem or habitat that you find on the forest floor. Steve is an incredible tree climber, and he can branch walk. Here he is, he's at 330 feet, and he's walked out on the end of a branch, suspended on his spider rope, and he's touching the branches of another tree, and he's 33 stories above the ground. So how do you move? How do you actually do this? I'm going to show you how it's done. It's called skywalking. Now for this, I'm going to need some volunteers. I'm going to need 2 people, both of whom I'd like to serve as the branches of a tree by holding out their arms. So I need someone who feels particularly tree-like tonight. And I'm going to need a third individual who is going to be the magical force of inertia. Do I have any volunteers? I see everybody shrinking in their chairs. Shy. Yeah, would you like to? Okay, cool. Now, in order to do this properly, I'm actually going to have to put on a tree climbing harness. Who's going to be the magic force of inertia? How about Oliver? You want to try it?
Sure.
All right, good. Oliver's going to help out. Good. These harnesses are very well designed, but if you wear them long enough, they can tire you out. Would I be doing a changeover as in vertical caving? It's probably much the same. I'm not familiar. I've never done caving. Are you a caver yourself?
I am actually.
Oh, okay. Well, this will be cool because you can probably comment on this and tell me what you see.
The gear is different.
Yeah. Now you have a spider rope, and you're carrying it with you. Now let's see. We're going to have one branch. Would you like to be a branch right here? You look very tree-like, very beautiful. Wonderful, excellent. Okay, now what you need to do is just put your arm out like that. Just hold it up just gently. You don't have to hold it up, just like that, like that. Just be a branch. And then you can be a branch over here, where let's say, yeah, okay. That's good. Now, let's say that I'm up in a tree. Oliver has seen this done many times. Let's say I'm up in a tree. I'm hanging from a branch on my spider rope. And you're going to be the branch I'm hanging from.
Let's go up to the challenge.
So here we go. The rope passes over your arm. So I'm making a big tangle out of this. All right. Okay. Let the rope go over your arm. Like that. Then it comes back to my harness. It works like this. You guys have to kind of imagine. Now let the rope go. Just let it slide gently. That's it. Okay. So I'm hanging from that branch. You see that? You have to kind of imagine that I'm in space. Now I'm going to go over to this branch over here. So I have the other end of my motion lanyard, and I simply throw the rope toward the branch. The branch. That's where the magic force of inertia comes in. So here we go. I sling that rope, and the magic force of inertia carries the rope over the branch. And since I'm a brilliant climber, and then it hangs down. We're not there yet, because let's say that branch is 30 feet away from me. Now, what am I going to do? I can't get attached to the branch. So the magic force of inertia allows the carabiner to hang down a little bit more. Excellent. Okay. Here we go. Now, I have over here on my harness, maybe you can see it. Can you see this? It's a little tiny Batman hook. See that? Little grapnel hook. I take it off. And it's on an antique fishing reel. A 1950 model automatic rewind flywheel that I got off of eBay for $11. And the only other bidder was Steve Sillett. And he was really annoyed when he found out I was driving up the price of these reels. The magic force of inertia carries the the grapnel hook over to the line, and if I threw it well, it'll become entangled with the working end of the rope. And then I can pull it back. And as I pull it, I'm going to pull the rope toward me. See that? It slides over the branch. Pretty soon, got it back to me. And I take the grapnel hook off. And now, if this works properly, I push a little button on my $11 automatic reel. It reels in the line. See that? It's completely awesome. Stick this back in my harness. Excuse me. Now I clip it to me. Get a stable anchor point on my harness. And then I tighten this rope up, like so.
Do you have a separate rope that's suspending you? I mean, this isn't what's holding your weight, right?
It is. My life is hanging on these two ropes. And one of the... So you have to imagine that I'm hanging vertically on this rope. And when you move through the redwood canopy, if you detach from the main climbing line, it's called going into motion in the forest canopy. And you have no way to get to the ground. If you get lost in the tree, if you get stuck somewhere, if your rope gets tangled, you need to have a climbing partner to extricate yourself. And meanwhile, you are literally moving in midair, going from branch to branch like this. And your life hangs on these ropes. And so each move you have to do with a sense of precision, and you can't make a mistake. And so I have things like I have everything color-coded so I don't get confused, and I move slowly, and very often I also have a safety line. And whenever I have the opportunity, I always use the safety line to take a second attachment point to the tree. So that normally you don't really ever want to be hanging on only one attachment to a tree. But sometimes you have to do it that way. So at any event...
You don't carry a cell phone, do you?
Oh yeah, it's a very good idea to carry a cell phone.
But you don't, do you?
And my cell phone, I have the telephone number of a local Princeton arborist. If all else fails, I have a deal with him. I'm going to call him and pay him some exorbitant sum of money, and he will climb up into the tree and get me. The guy's not in California. He's right around here where he can get at me. So what happens is I now tighten up on this loop, and pretty soon I'm hanging on a V of ropes, where half my weight is on one branch, half my weight is on the other. And then at some point, when I'm ready to go, I release my first anchor, and just let her go. And there we go. And then sometimes you take a little swing when you do that. It's kind of fun. And you wind up swinging over here on branch number 2. And I've done this moving from tree to tree at the tops of the redwoods in the Atlas Grove. Okay, that's it.
Mechanical ascenders making these. This is like basically a modified Pristic now.
Right, exactly.
And the arborists feel real comfortable in their ability to tie Pristics and Pristics not slipping.
Yeah, this is a very special knot. This knot here is called the Blake's hitch. And it was invented in 1991 by a California arborist named Jason Blake. If you invent a knot, you get your name on it. And it's a sophisticated sliding prusik that can grip the rope like a fist, but can also slide on the rope when it's manipulated in certain ways. And it's the knot that we use with children when they're climbing. Turns out that kids can use this knot safely if they're taught how to do it. It's a great knot. It's an awesome knot. So that's basically how it's done.
How long does that take?
How long does it take to what?
Movement.
Oh, movement is slow. In principle, it's exactly like Batman, or rather like Spider-Man, except that you're not moving the way Spider-Man does. You're moving slowly and thoughtfully. And you know, if you're not moving slowly and thoughtfully, you shouldn't be climbing at all. So, and you're wearing a helmet too, of course.
Just climbed out.
Well, I think we're nearly out of time, but I'll show you a few more pictures, and then I thought perhaps we could, I could take some questions. This shows me working my way across the Atlas Grove with a whole bunch of ropes. And that gentleman who served as one of the branches asked me about mechanical ascenders. They come in handy all the time in the canopy, and you can see me using 2 of them right there. I'm using the mechanical ascenders to pull myself up this long line. This is my spider rope, which I'm hanging from. And this actually is a Steve Sillett's rope that he threw over to me, and I've attached to it. And I'm using it to cross a gap of about 50 feet from this tree to another one you can't see. Steve Sillett is a much better tree climber than I am. Here we have him actually doing the motion. He's thrown a rope into the top of this redwood. He is 300 feet above the ground. You would never know it looking at that. This redwood is named Kronos, the Titan of time in the Greek mythology. And the whole top of this tree had torn out recently in a storm, and he wanted to find out what was going on. So he swung himself over, got into the tree by doing what I call skywalking. And you notice he's standing on a structure which is, it's about as solid as Stilton cheese. And I was nervous, and I was saying, Steve, really, you're scaring me. And he said, it's all right. He pointed out that this line was attaching him to the other tree. And if this structure had collapsed, he just would have swung back to the tree. It would have been an ugly swing. He might have hurt himself, but he wouldn't have died. When you get very high into these trees, what you see is this spectacular, dramatic narrowing and delicacy of the trunk. This portion of a tree, and of a redwood tree, is called the tree's leader. The tree concentrates its energy and its nutrients and its growth in this inexorable thrust to become the tallest thing around, so that it can gather more light and so that it can disperse its seeds more widely in the forest and therefore perpetuate its DNA as an organism. The scientists are studying what these trees do, how they move water through their tops. They have the ability to absorb fog and moisture and send it downward into the tree if there's a dearth of water in the roots of the tree. They've rigged all kinds of scientific gear, computers, all kinds of stuff. Some of these trees are wired up like a patient in an ICU with more than a mile of cabling, data cable. And this particular tree is one of the tallest on Earth. It is named John Muir. And there's a line here. These Canopy scientists will be going back and forth between the 2 trees at about 350 feet above the ground. And this is me. I'm purporting to help Steve diagnose his electronics. But I had no idea what I was doing. Basically, what I was doing was having a cool time and being a reporter.
Marie Antoine up there taking that picture?
Marie Antoine took a lot of these photographs. She climbs steadily with Steve, and she works with him. When they climb together, they often have essentially each other's lives in their hands. Redwoods are rare because 96% of the old growth redwoods were cut down. This is the sad part of the story. Gigantic trees, bigger than the ones we know today, were taken in the early part to the middle part of the 20th century. And with the introduction of mechanical logging equipment, the redwood forest, the old growth redwood forest was nearly exterminated. With clear cuts that just went on for miles and miles across the landscape of Northern California. This was a tree that was cut around 1901 in Fieldbrook, California. Redwood doesn't rot. That's why it's so valuable. But it also means that these stumps persist for a long time. And people find them too inconvenient to pull out of the ground, so they just build around them. Well, I think I'm going to end the talk there because we seem to be out of time. But I want to thank you very much. And say that these organisms are much older than we are, much bigger than we are, and fully worthy of our respect. And the quest to understand them as living things is going to go on for more than our lifetimes. They are very complicated, beautiful organisms about which very little is known. Thank you. Eric.
Yes.
How are you?
Good. Could you describe the root structure that holds up a tree at 360 feet high?
Oh, Eric Greenfeld has asked a really interesting question about the root structure of redwoods. Redwoods don't have a taproot. The tree springs out of a very fine mat of thread-like roots. And the roots extend unknown distances horizontally through the soil. Nobody knows how far they go, but they may only penetrate a couple of feet down into the ground. And the roots may join physically with the roots of other redwoods, forming a kind of felt-like mat in the forest floor. And sometimes these root systems can give rise to ramettes, genetically identical twins of a master tree that may be 100 yards away. And scientists have gone into the forest and they've studied the DNA of redwoods, and they find that there's a redwood growing over here, which is actually part of a redwood growing way over here. Nobody knows how far the roots go. But what happens is that this is the reason why they fall instantly. There's no taproot. And in a windstorm, when one of these trees starts to lean, the force of tension on that root system is profound. You're talking about a tree the size of an office building. And eventually, the lean produces so much leverage of force on the root system that the whole thing just collapses. And the tree loses the war with gravity. Yes?
I was curious as to how you can accurately measure a 370-foot tree to the nearest, or 370-foot tree to the nearest inch.
That's a fabulous question. How do you measure these trees to the nearest inch? It turns out to be non-trivial. They were using lasers in trigonometry, but it turns out that it's virtually impossible to measure the height of a tree accurately from the ground with any known technology to within better than an error bar of about 5 inches. But the scientists really want to know exactly how fast these trees are growing or how fast they're retreating over time. They're studying them year by year by year. They need to know within an inch how that tree is growing. And the only way to do it is to climb to the very top of the tree, pulling a tape line with you, and literally measure the tree with a tape line. And I did this on these expeditions. We also had a big expedition to Australia where we were climbing these giant eucalyptus trees that are 300 feet tall and trying to run a tape line down with a 50-mile-an-hour wind. It's pretty interesting, but that's how you do it.
Really?
Measure with tape. Yes, in the back there.
Is the western coast of the United States the only place that they grow?
Yes, these questions are great. They're all things that I should have covered in the lecture. Only on this little slender ribbon of territory on the west coast of North America, principally in California, and only within about 10 miles of the sea or so, do these redwoods grow. There are relic species. Fossils of redwoods, or trees that look much like them, have been found all over the northern hemisphere from about 50 to 55 million years ago in Eocene times, when it seems as though redwoods dominated forests throughout the northern hemisphere. But for reasons that we don't quite understand, they lost their wars with other trees, and they gradually retreated. And they ended up on the coast of California, the way many retired people do. Yes, ma'am.
Do banana slugs grow basically in the redwood forest, or what other kinds of insects and unusual animals do you find there?
Oh gosh, if I'd had more time with my lecture, I would have shown you some photographs. But yes, you don't find banana slugs in the canopy, but they found an unknown species of brown worm. They don't know what it is. They found a small organism, which is a water flea. It's called a harpaticoid copepod. It's a copepod. Under a microscope, it looks a little bit like a flea or a shrimp. And it lives in the canopy soil, hundreds of feet above the ground on these trees. They don't know what the species is. They've never identified the species, but they found it also in stream beds at the bottom of the forest floor in running water. Now, what this organism is doing at the bottom of streams, and then there's a population of them up in the forest canopy, nobody knows how they even get there. They don't know whether the population ever makes it to the ground, whether there's any interchange or not. They find wandering salamanders. It's a species of salamander which is endemic to Humboldt County. They found breeding populations of these salamanders 300 feet above the ground. They know that it's a breeding population because they find juveniles there. So this is a species which is carrying on its entire life cycle in the forest canopy. They found numbers of unknown lichens. I think at last count there are something like 120 different forms of lichen in the redwood canopy. There are extremely rare mosses that don't occur pretty much anywhere else. There's one called, I remember its actual scientific name. It's a form of dicranum. And it's a particular type of dicranum that only grows under leaky wounds in old growth conifers, particularly redwoods. It feeds on the sap when a big rotten branch hauls out and tears out of one of these giant old trees. You find a little layer of this particular species of moss just growing in that one place. It doesn't grow anywhere else. This is the kind of biodiversity that you see in the redwood canopy. Yes?
You said that in the 70s, some of the redwoods were cut down. Are they protected now?
The redwoods are currently, the old growth redwoods are now, almost all of them are sitting inside a small handful of state and national parks along the north coast of California. And all of those giant trees that I showed you in those groves all exist in protected park areas. And in some cases, top park officials know where these groves are. But in many cases, the rangers in the park don't know where the grove is. Yes, and back there.
Is there any relationship with the sequoia?
Yes, the giant sequoia tree and the coast redwood are close cousins. They're both members of the cypress family. We don't know when they had their last common ancestor, but it might have been anywhere from 20 to 50 million years ago. But they are quite closely related. They're also, both trees are quite closely related to the bald cypress tree that grows in wetlands and swamps in the southeastern part of the United States, like in Florida, Alabama, Georgia. Yes, sir?
Are the elements for the tree growth, like iron and magnesium, have to come from the soil, or do they come from birds and things?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. The question was, do the elements for the growth of these trees come entirely from the soil, from the ground, or do they derive nutrients from the atmosphere, such as birds? And the answer is both. Redwoods, one reason why redwoods can grow so large is because the soil in these valleys is incredibly fertile. But they do seem to derive nitrogen and nutrients from birds landing on them. But it's a double-edged sword. A lot of the tallest redwoods will have a damaged leader because birds are territorial. A male bird wants to get to the highest place around and then perch there and then dominate just the way the redwood is trying to do it. But a bird landing right on the leader of a redwood will damage the leader. And when the leader of a redwood dies or pulls back, it'll send out additional trunks coming up around it. And then if the entire top of the tree is blown out in a storm, or if it dies back because the roots of the tree have lost their access to water, it will start sending up these huge trunks from lower down. Redwoods are fantastically tough organisms. You can burn a redwood to a black spire, and it will come back. Yes?
In the areas that were clear cut, is there new growth?
Yeah, what's happened is that if a redwood is cut off at its base, as distinct from falling over when its root system pulls entirely out of the ground, but if it's cut off, like in logging, and the roots remain embedded in the soil, it can then send up new trees, which are called stump sprouts, and they come up in a ring around the redwood stump. And in the fullness of time, they can become a ring of large redwoods, which is called a fairy ring in the forest. But the timber companies now are cutting these redwoods on a regular schedule, typically every 50 years or so. So the trees never really get big. But what they're cutting is they're cutting the sprouts of the giant redwoods that continue to exist in the ground as organisms, but just have not been able to develop huge trunks. If we want to see these giant creatures again, we have to wait 1,000 years at least. Yes, way in the back there.
There are a lot of lawn redwoods in Princeton.
Yes.
And some of them are very tall. Is there any connection there with the forest redwood?
Yes, the dawn redwood is a wonderful beautiful tree. It was discovered in China, I think in 1948, originally by a Chinese botanist. And American botanists took specimens of it to the U.S. And they had connections here to Princeton. And a dawn redwood tree was planted right next to Prospect House in 1950. And it's the largest tree, certainly on the Princeton campus and maybe in the area. It's been growing fantastically, and it's a beautiful redwood tree. It's also very tall, and it's going to get taller. The dawn redwoods typically do not grow anywhere near as tall as the California coast redwoods. Dawn redwoods seem to be able to get to, at most, about 180 to 200 feet, which is still a very impressive tree.
Aren't dawn redwoods Thuya instead of sequoia?
No, they're not. They are, the Thuya is Thuya plicata. What is that? That's the, Thuya plicata is the red cedar, the western red cedar. Yeah. No, the dawn redwood is metasequoia. Metasequoia, yeah. Yes?
Are the redwoods only in the parks protected? Is there no other control from
No,
covering?
the redwoods that are outside the parks are privately owned. And the vast, vast majority of them are owned by major corporations, by timber companies, that are harvesting them on a regular schedule for the benefit of the corporation and the shareholders. Georgia Pacific, Pacific Lumber Company, Simpson Timber Company. These corporations control and own a lot of the land, and it's managed for harvest. It's managed for timber production. But you know, at 50 years, a redwood may be about like that, which is a pretty big tree, but it's a pin compared to what it could be.
Is there no longer Bureau of Land Management land?
As far as I know, there's no BLM land where there are any redwoods growing. Yeah. Yes.
The redwoods in Southern California are not in forests as dense as the ones that you've been talking about. Has that changed the ecosystem around them, say in the Big Sur area?
Yeah, in the southern end of their range, the redwoods. Redwoods seem to have the ability to change the ecosystem and control the ecosystem in which they exist. Once they get into a valley, it's very difficult to get them out. They become utterly entrenched, and they kill off other tree species. And I presume that the same thing is happening in these little tiny valleys along the Big Sur coast, where redwoods are the dominant tree. They change the chemistry of the soil. They make it very difficult for other trees to exist. They quench all the light on the forest floor to the point where there are almost no tree species can exist at this low level of light, except for redwoods. And a redwood has an extremely good tolerance for low light. They're very low light tolerant, shade tolerant trees. And so for example, they've cut, they once cut they took a disc out of a dead redwood that was this big around. It was a small redwood, and the tree was 900 years old. So when they're in shadow, they don't grow, they just wait. But they don't die either. And if you look at one of these little redwoods and you count the growth rings, you find that the growth rings are in some cases only one cell deep. In other cases, there are no cells. The growth rings peter out entirely. A redwood seems to be able to wait for years before it adds a new growth ring. This is one reason why dendrochronologists, people who try to age trees, have no idea how old the redwoods are, because they know that when they do a ring count, especially when the rings get tight, that they're almost certainly underestimating the age of the tree, because the tree will not have added rings for some unknown period of time. It's like, when you buy a car, and you know for a fact that somebody turned the odometer off repeatedly, but you don't know for how long.
I think one more question,
Okay, one more?
if there is one.
Well, okay. Oh, yes, one more?
In the biology of aging, from a layman's point of view, there's a way of looking at cells to detect how long a cell has been functioning. Are those limits preserved in redwoods?
I think, that's a very good question. I think probably not, because what happens is that, in a plant, as the cambium expands, the cells on the inside die. They become dead structures for conducting water, made of cellulose. The living part of a tree is just the outer surface, the cambium. And that cambium typically won't be very old. Whereas the inner part of the tree, the heartwood, is going to be an organic structure, which is not alive. I wonder whether you could do carbon-14 dating, or whether there may be other kinds of isotope dating you could do in the core of a redwood, perhaps.